there guys, it's Joey and this is my witchy vlog for the week, which is my experiences with the rune tier for Runes 101, but it's also sort of a witchy vlog for myself and my experiences with the energies of this rune on the Celtic path, which is mine. My own, my purchase. So a few quick notes at the start. Tier being for victory, justice, war, success by sacrifice, fighting spirit, achieving victory, simple ever passionate man, increase in power and money, rising up through the world through your own abilities, excellent rune in love and romance, timely new romance filled with happiness. Tier is extremely masculine, quick recovery from illness. I think that's all we need to touch on meaning wise before we get into it again, just to recap, I guess. I was seeing this rune in Nottingham when I was at my sister's. I've been waiting for it, and it was an interesting week with this rune. And card readings pertaining to change have often had justice in them recently, perhaps relating to this rune's energies. And I wrote Excalibur, just wrote it down. I got that feeling right at the start. And then Lady of the Lake, Lady of Avalon mentioned in multiple places this week, one of which was the Elemental Witch. And I must explore the Avalon, Morgan Le Fay energies this week and the rightful sovereignty of Great Britain. So then the following information is from timelessmyths.com/Celtic/Celtic world. The other world was a domain of deities or supernatural beings such as the Fae. They were hidden from mortal eyes by strong otherworld magic. Some of these other worlds were located on islands, the dunes, dunhills, forests, rivers and lakes. They could appear at night to mortals but would vanish by morning. Time would pass differently there. Connected to this imagery, right, if I say any of this wrong I apologise, I am a little bit shaky today. Connected to this imagery was the Tir na Nog, which was the home of the Tuatha De Danann. Okay, so the Tir na Nog is the land of youth, and Tuatha De Danann is gods in the Celtic pantheon. And it's worth noting here that, you know, Tir na Nog is Tyr in the beginning of his name, which I don't usually like the obvious connections because that's usually a load of nonsense. It's like, oh, it's got the same name, it must mean something, and usually that's a load of rubbish, to be honest. But it did sort of strike to me that it was interesting that this came up this week with it being Tyr. But there are, however, connections which took musing, meditating and a little bit of thought process. Tir na Nog has 4 magical cities. Right, I don't even know if we're going to be saying these right. Okay, so Falias, Goraias, Phineas and Muras. If I'm not saying those right, I apologise. In each city was a magical treasure or talisman, which the Tuatha De Danann received when they arrived in Ireland. The Lia Fé, the Stone of Destiny in Falias, the Gaea Sail, Spear of Lu in Goraias, the Cauldron of Dagda in Muras. Oh, and this one, I don't know if we're even going to be able to say it. I think it's Freigachach, I think. Or in English, Ansara, the Sword of Nawada in Phineas. Findias. In British and Welsh lore, the Celtic otherworld was associated with the Isle of Avalon, the domain of the Lady of the Lake, and Morgana Le Fay. Okay, so the next... I was just making rough notes the first day or two, and then the next day I had the Morrigan tell me this quite clearly. Accept no limitations and laugh at imitations. They're never going to have your strength. They are merely wraiths, shadows of your light. Burn ever bright, child of mine, scorch them all to dust. The following day, spent the entire day purifying, which is why the pine cone is in shot. Because the troll was ripping off videos, including what I bought and how I presented the videos, so I spent the whole day just cleansing, getting rid of it, just cleansing, latching on energies, and did the pine cone cleansing. Oh, I used some of the rainforest resin that Miss Bramble sent, and it was fantastic stuff. Generally so far I've not felt victorious this week, perhaps because maybe I've not engaged as much as I should. I've been quite off this week, quite distant from things. I had sold a few orders from the store, which is good, but I was hoping some more of the Halloween things would go. They did actually go after I said that. A couple more bits went. I kept physically injuring myself that day as well. I'm quite clumsy by nature, and I hurt my back and dropped something on my feet, and I was not doing very well, which I'm sure the cleansing out of everything has since helped. Perhaps with a full moon I should attempt some Avalon Lady of the Lake Excalibur magic for healing. And here's some more information and imagery, and this is where it starts to fall into place. Lady of the Lake, Water Witch, relevant to last week's water-heavy associations with kelpies and shape-shifting. So this week the emphasis is perhaps more of the line between sword and water, intellect and emotion, and the great right, the emergence of male and female and opposing forces. The great right symbolically is a sword representing the man plunging into a cup representing the woman. The two main magical artifacts of Arthurian legend, which we've already shown has relevance within this rune's energies, are Excalibur and the Grail, and obviously within the symbolic great right, as I said, the sword and the cup. It is worth investigating the Celtic mythological sword, the Answerer, for further enlightenment. It, after all, is associated with answers, as well as being connected to the imagery of this rune, a sword. I was very much determined there was sword energies tied up with this rune completely. So yeah, so then I researched into the sword some more, and we were reading about Nuada. The king of the Tuatha De Danann is the great and noble warrior Nuada. I was feeling a bit like there was something missing before I did this, before the research clicked everything into place, because it was supposed to be this masculine rune, this masculine warrior strength rune, and I was like, how is this working into my path, working, my understanding, my learning? And this is how it happened. He was the king of the gods when they set out from the Tir na n, but lost his position when he lost his arm in battle against the Filbog at Machtured, which is eerily similar, of course, to the Nordic tales of Tyr, showing the interconnectedness of spiritual mythos even across cultures, because Tyr loses his arm. Though the Filbog were defeated, Nuada had to abdicate his position of Rai, as he was not completely whole in his body. The mythos of the land and the ruler being connected is intimately connected with Morrigan's function to replace kings. This is going to come up a little bit again in the Morgana Le Fay, because with the Christianization of Celtic mythos, it's sometimes interpreted that her role as replacing a king who was no longer serving the best interests of the land, and then the land would suffer, was sort of demonized into Morgana Le Fay, who was treacherously trying to get rid of her own half-brother and replace him for reasons of her own power and greed. Yeah. But that's all tied up with Morrigan's function of replacing old with new, and the interconnectedness of land, sovereignty, and personal, king. Bres ma Eltha the Beautiful, took the place of Nuada and proceeded to tyrannize the Tuatha De Danann. After a while, his excesses, lack of hospitality, and weakness in the face of greater aggression by the demonic Fomori caused the chieftains of the Tuatha De Danann to rise up and cast him out. Bress, being half Fomori, fled to his father's kin and plotted revenge. In need of a king, the physician Dion Hecht, I could be saying that completely wrong, built Nuada a new arm out of silver, allowing him to regain the kingships of the gods. Later, his son, Miach, used Teoth, or magic, to heal Nuada's arm and make it whole again, allowing him to lead the battle against the Fomori in the Gods' War, where they cast them down at the second battle of Night Turet. So they were victorious because of Nuada leading them into battle. Nuada's mortal form, however, was slain in that battle, but his godly essence was unbound and released and returned to Tin Anor. As the rest of the Tuatha De Danann shed their bodies and rejoined him, he became the odd throughout of the gods, ruling in Gorias over the whole of the Tuatha De Danann. Nuada is the patron of rulers and warriors, showing the interconnectedness of this concept within Celtic mythos, the epitome of what it is to be a Ri or Taosu ruler. I could be saying that wrong. I probably am. He wields, of course, the Ansura, a sword which never misses and strikes down any foe, and the sword is sacred to Nuada. So here we have several ideas interwoven: that of sovereignty, the right to rule through honourable conduct, the need to be whole, balanced in Celtic law in order to be able to rule, and the healing abilities to restore an individual to their rightful place. Morrigan, as seen previously, was watered down in Christian mythos to Morgan le Fay so that her rightful function to replace weaker kings was demonised into treachery. The links here between sovereignty and sword are abundant and remain so even in the Christianised versions of the Arthurian legends, with Excalibur only being drawn from the stone by the worthy king of the Britons, Arthur. I remember as a young girl being obsessed with the Lady in the Lake imagery of her hand rising from the water with the sword Excalibur contained within it. I used to draw it all the time as a young person. The connection of the Lady in the Lake, Avalon, Morgan le Fay, and the Celtic myths of the Tir Nanor Land of Youth or Otherworld are so expansive and unconnected it can almost be too expansive and difficult to make sense of it all. Like, there's so many connected threads weaving in and out of this mythos, connecting them. They're the same concept, the same idea, but different interpretations of it. Different ways of seeing the same ideas of the other world. There is definitely a presence this week of the physical artifact and the magical and spiritual relevance of them. Most prominent amongst them this week, of course, being the sword. Given the rune's energies are overtly masculine and the two myths of import surrounding artifacts, Excalibur and Ansura, swords, are tied to male kingship, I suppose it makes sense that to connect to them as a female can prove slightly more difficult. However, viewed in the light of the need for balance within all things, we can interpret it as the need to balance masculine kingship energies within ourselves. And remember that there is always a cup female counterpart, the Grail in Arthurian legend, which is believed to have been derived from the cauldron of Bran the Blessed, who was watered down to the Fisher King, similar to the way in which Morrigan was watered down to Morgana le Fay. In the second branch, Bran has a cauldron that can resurrect the dead, which analogues with the two Welsh texts. I have no idea how to say this. Culhwch, and Olwyn. I have no idea how to say it, so sorry. In which King Arthur's men must travel to Ireland to retrieve a magical cauldron, and the obscure poems The Spoils of Anlin, which speak of a similar mystical cauldron sought by Arthur in the otherworldly land of Anwin. The cauldron, of course, is intimately linked not only with the time of year, with Samhain approaching, as well as the blood moon aspect, but is also intimately tied to the realm of the crone, divination, and the relationship between life and death. The blood moon coming up honours the sacrifice of animals, food, and personal sacrifice within its energies. Sacrifice, being tied to the actual meaning of the rune, is also tied into all of the myths here mentioned. Nawada sacrifices his arm and then his entire body in defending the Tuatha De Danann. Arthur eventually sacrifices his own life for his country, as well as much of his life and his knights searching for the Grail. Bran sacrifices his own head, albeit it doesn't stop him talking to those around him. The sacrifices of the just and noble often lead to life everlasting in the other worlds, Avalon and Tir Nanor. Honourable conduct and sacrifice are often a matter of course for those following a warrior's path. There's no escaping destiny, and how we behave determines our worth. Moaning about it, demanding praise for it, or drawing attention to the suffering of others, especially those we are supposed to be protecting, belittles the actions of warriors themselves. I think the imagery here of the Ace of Swords within my own deck is tarot deck, is particularly relevant. The intellectual pursuit, the dual nature of the sword, able to destroy or protect, determined only by how it is wielded. So that would be the dual nature of magical artifacts, of weapons or tools, depending on how you look at them. Perception again. And then, of course, personal responsibility and action. The boundaries of honour are not clear-cut in the modern world. Some modern interpretations of acceptable social behaviour are actually dishonourable. Dishonourable behaviours are encouraged for dishonourable purpose, usually social control. It has always been important to me as a witch that self-government is key, because doctrine is quite often unmoving, unyielding, and sometimes outdated, and hatred can creep in more easily that way against differing spiritual practices or people. It's not to say that witches are perfect, far from it, as I am not myself, as I keep learning over and over. Shedding pride can often be the hardest lesson for a warrior. There's also been, with regards to magical items, a focus point of magic, been a lot of cinnamon broom imagery mentioning. It's been all over the place, cinnamon brooms this week. I can't get hold of one, so I'm going to make my own. And I made my own, and it's in shot, and it was in video yesterday. Prior to the drawing of the next rune, I went to the neighbouring town, and there was some incredible imagery. And there were, on the way in, there were 5 swans in a field, which I found bizarre, and as I was watching them, they took off in flight. On the way back, there were 5 pheasants at the side of a road. I'm going to look more into that. I just thought I would mention that at the end. And all the way back, there were crows everywhere, hundreds of them, and there were so many in flight on the way home. It was like little black clouds of them moving overhead. It was incredibly spiritually moving. I need to do a bit more research on bits and pieces just to help me make sense of that, but that did happen on the way back. Okay. So it's been an interesting week with Tyr. It's been very much having to seek, and the idea of questing does come into this rune. Having to seek answers, having to find things, having to create things, and the things in question often being magical artifacts, and then drawing that back to the energies of the rune and what it means to me as a witch in spiritual growth. With it being tied up with sword imagery, it's always fascinating to me. I've always loved swords. Always. I love the shape, I love the design, I love drawing them, I love the legends of them. And it just must have been, in a way, my psyche coming forward, sort of preparing me and having an interest in the sort of warrior side of things. Then there is, of course, the dual nature of swords and how they can be wielded in a good way or a negative way, and that's true with everything, and that's true with us as people, as human beings and as witches. The way we choose to wield the power that we hold can be double-edged. We can use it to hurt people and we can use it to help people, and often we don't consider the consequences, of far-reaching consequences perhaps, of things we do or don't do, things we do or don't say. And words, of course, being the realm of intellect connected with swords, particularly through tarot. The way that words can cut down or lift up. And there has been that balance this week between the realm of the intellect and the realm of the emotion, and being wary of what you say, and being aware that sacrifice is sometimes necessary for the I want to say resurrection, but that doesn't seem right, because it's sort of tied to death and rebirth in this aspect in the mythos, with Noada shedding his human body and becoming more. So it's perhaps shedding what you don't need and becoming more, and it doesn't have to be obviously in a literal death sense, hopefully not, I'm still here, but rather shedding people, things, negative situations that you just don't need. And we're coming up to Samhain, so that makes perfect sense, and the whole feeling the need to absolutely purify my home and myself with a really good whack of purification things, just to get rid of that latching energies of people and negative situations that are not required in my life anymore, is tying into this sort of forceful masculine rune. It was interesting for the intellectual pursuit to read up a bit more about Celtic mythology, and sort of information about Celtic mythology has been popping up here, there and everywhere to sort of perhaps encourage a bit more intellectual pursuit this week, which I think is always important. The quest for knowledge is always important in a lot of ways, because to read, to be informed, to expand your mind is something you should never ever stop doing, and that is a worthwhile quest. It's not entirely as clear cut as a search for a magical artifact, but then if we consider the sword can be a symbol of intellect, then that makes sense. The quest for intellectual knowledge, opening of one's mind, pursuit of one's personal path. Coming into Samhain and the blood moon that has just passed, that makes perfect sense to me. And then again, this week is the need for balance within all things. The fact that even though this rune has a very masculine drive to it, there has to be the counterbalance of the feminine energy. There has to be the Grail to the Excalibur. There has to be the Cauldron of Bran to the sword, the Answerer. And it's particularly as a woman, sometimes connecting to that very overtly strong masculine energy, it can be a little bit complicated, and you have to sort of digest it in a way which makes sense, because we do have to balance the masculine and feminine energies within ourselves. So when the energies of a particular experience, in this case the rune, are overtly one way or the other, we then have to try and seek the balancing within ourselves and within our experiences. And last but not least is the sacrifice. I think, that's a bit fascinating imagery within all mythologies. There is always talk of honourable warrior conduct and sacrifice in order to become more, to ascend in a lot of ways, to give yourself wholly to your ideas. And even in the ideas, though it might be in the stories, it might be physical death, it can be for us giving ourselves over to our ideas, to our love for our path or whatever, to the point where we then grow and become more than we are. And I think that's it for this week. I hope you enjoyed this video. Many blessings.